So this is a topic that comes up actually way more often than I would like. And I have this conversation with traditional martial arts people, and I also have this conversation with combat sports people. And so my argument is basically based on a single historical fact that combat sports now are more necessary than ever. And the biggest reason for that is not because somehow they're better or anything like that. It's that they provide one essential service that we have kind of done away with socially, at least in first world countries, by and large. And that is the fact that historically speaking, when all of these traditional martial arts systems were being developed, people were already fighting. People grew up scrapping. People were victims of, highway robbery, banditry, piracy, those kind of things. Whether it was armed or schoolyard scuffles, whatever, people were much more used to just kind of daily fighting and scrapping and everything. Some of that is part of honor culture issues, and some of that is just the fact that society gets progressively less dangerous over time. And the fact is that for the most part, even up into part of the 20th century, most people didn't take martial arts to learn how to fight because they were already fighting. I've got friends who are just a decade older than me that still grew up fighting and scrapping. I had a little bit of that early on, but that went away around junior high school for me. And the fact is that people grew up fighting a lot. They already understood how to kind of deal with the stress. They understood kind of typical movement patterns that people would use. They understood a lot of the subtle cues, even if they couldn't articulate them. These are things that they knew because fighting was commonplace. And because of that, when they went to take martial arts classes, what they were really going to do was learning how to be better, more efficient, more powerful, right? They were going there to get conditioning and technique and tactics and strategy to deal with escalating threats or just to be better, right? In the modern world, though, especially in first world countries, I know that there are some places still, even within first world countries, and there are many countries that still exist, where fighting is still commonplace, but it's not so much here in the US. And the fact that people are not spending a lot of their formative years and even early adult years getting into scraps and fighting and stuff basically means that a lot of these people going into martial arts are going there to actually learn how to fight in the first place. And that's something that a lot of these traditional systems weren't actually designed to do, right? Everybody's favorite whipping boy, Aikido, right? And look, I haven't actually done a lot of work to verify this because it's not my art and it's not a particular point of interest for me. But my understanding is that in order to do Aikido, you are expected to already have rank in a more classical jujitsu system. You were already expected to know how to fight, and Aikido was supposed to be elevating what you already knew. That may be part, not the entire reason, but that may be part why modern Aikido doesn't work anymore. It's not because the toolbox is bad, it's because it's being misapplied and it's being given to beginners who still need a foundation to work with. And that's exactly where combat sports enter in, right? And that is why having things like Golden Gloves boxing for teens and having youth wrestling in school, having kids even just playing football and rugby if you're lucky, is so helpful. So helpful. Having the organized, contact sports and combat sports as part of school curricula, or at least extracurricular activities, having community center possibilities and things like that is so important to this, because you have to get people to be able to fight first. And that's part of why, the way that I teach Wing Chun is going to be criticized by a lot of traditionalists, not because I'm not teaching the traditional Wing Chun, but I'm not teaching it in the traditional way. And the simple reason for that is you have to know how to fight. You have to be able to deal with What if somebody's just throwing a hook at my head? How do I deal with that? You're not going to get that by just drilling. You got to actually experience that, which means sparring very early on, or something that I call bully drills, which we'll get into another time. But the overall idea being that you have to make a read, make a decision, and act, right? It's that whole OODA loop thing. You have to do that. Even if it's in a limited capacity, you have to get that experience very early on. You have to be able to play. You have to be able to spar. You have to be able to kind of do these randomized, semi-chaotic contact things, even if they're done friendly and playfully, which does have some negatives, but is better than nothing. You have to be able to do that stuff. And the fact is that that kind of stuff, whether you're getting somebody prepped for, competitive fighting, or you're just using those paradigms as a means to get people used to it, like strip things down, get people just boxing, kickboxing, basic wrestling. And once they have those kind of gross motor skills, I mean, we're talking like basic gross motor skills, treat them like children for a minute, let them kind of develop a little bit of basic movement and tactical competency, and then you can really, really start shaping the technique. But you kind of got to rough it out first. I want you to think of it kind of like sketching, right? I'm not going to sit here and do a time-lapse thing or anything like that. But you think about like if you ever watch any comic book artist or anything like that, you watch them sketch out their pencils first, and it is a mess. But the thing is that they're following lines, and they're finding the pose and the motion and the perspective, and they're finding all of that. And as they go, they start hardening in the lines, and they start digging in, and then they bring in the eraser and they kind of clean things up, and then they bring in the inks and it solidifies it, and then the color happens, right? And that's what we have to do with martial arts training. Martial arts training is very much that process. You rough it out first. You've got to rough it out, right? So this is that Pareto principle 80-20 thing. You have to get this idea down of just like, let's get the gross motor skills, the basics down, get people throwing, 6 punches and 7 kicks and some basic footwork and some basic grips, a couple of basic takedowns, some basic ground positions, right? I mean, that is all stuff that you can do inside of 6 months. And is that going to make them a great fighter? No. Is that even going to make them prepared for their first match? Maybe, maybe not, depending on how well your teaching style and their learning style mesh. But the overall general idea though is you have to get them to fight, and having them sit there and do 10,000 reps of a block or a punch or a kick isn't going to be teaching them how to fight. That's stuff that they need to know how to do once they kind of have an idea of like, when would I even employ this idea, right? Gross motor skills roughed out is a really, really important thing. And that's no longer being satisfied by people just growing up fighting and spending their young adult lives fighting. It's just not happening the way that it used to. And that is where combat sports are so important in the modern era. It allows us to do it safely and legally and still get that roughed out form. And then you can go into the details and the nitty gritty and the context specific stuff. It's not that combat sports are some magical cure-all. It's that combat sports satisfy a previously fulfilled requirement that has kind of gone away. So that's all I've got for you today. And this is a message more to the traditionalists than anybody else. But honestly, it's also a message to the combat sports people. Understand where things go in the training. Understand where things go in the stack and how you're developing things, right? Because if martial arts is this big, any one of us has this much information, if that. So we got to be careful. We got to be careful. We have to be judicious, and we have to create a progression strategy. So that's it, and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Hey, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, do all the other social media stuff. You can check out our other socials, as well as take a look at some of the merchandise that we have for offer in the links below. And if you happen to be in the Phoenix metro area, stop in, come in for a class, come in just to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Until next time, good journey.